I had been doing a lot of location films, such as Greystoke, then The Mission. So I had been away abroad in rainforests and deserts for quite a long time. So I was quite happy when I got a film that was actually home-based in London. So that was quite nice after being away so much.
I had a good relationship with Tom Busman. He was always being approached to do odd films, but he didn't want to do them. I mean, he was very successful as an advertising director, commercials director. And then he was offered this film to do, and I was working with him at the time, and we got on quite well together. And he asked me to do it. It was tough in terms, for him it was tough, because he'd never done a film, as far as I know, he'd never done a film before, so he was kind of thrown in the deep end. And there was some kind of, him and the producer was a bit of, what can I say, just, they didn't hit it off. And so it was always a continual battle against what he wanted and what he couldn't have, or what he wanted and what he couldn't afford to have. And it was a battle.
Whoops Apocalypse sadly had quite a tight budget, which clipped our wings a lot for some of the things that were required, like a repeating gun that was basically supposed to be a machine gun, but it just fired sparks. And to make a gun like that is very time-consuming, and obviously there's a lot of R&D goes into that, and so it becomes very expensive. And the one that we produced in the end, because of the budget restraint, was nothing like it should have been.
In terms of a movie, I think it was quite good. I think it looked all right, and we got through it in one piece. The strange thing was, in fact, it was stuff we shot in Miami, and the way it usually worked before, I mean, in my early days of making movies, was you did the bit in London and all the work in the studios, and then that was it. They then got someone else in, because they didn't want to fly you out to Miami. But I actually got asked, I think on about a week before Christmas, to go out to Miami to do. So I left here on Boxing Day, and off we went to Miami, and I was out there for about a month and a half picking up all the bits and pieces.
It was split into two parts, one in the UK and one in Florida. Now, for some reason, I can't remember why, I couldn't or wouldn't go to Florida, because I was thinking probably on something else at the time, and it overran.
Everything else went according to plan. We had some of the artists were on crosses, sort of like a religious scene there, where we were on, I think it was Queen's Park Rangers football ground we shot that in, and they started off in a horizontal position and then were moved up into the upright, which we did with hydraulics and a big pump in the middle of the football pitch, which I remember the groundsman was very aware of and sort of a bit worried about, because obviously oil on there, it wasn't grass, it was one of those fake grass pitches in that day. And so he was very aware of the fact we had gallons of hydraulic oil swilling around in the hoses and things.
An estimated crowd of 100,000 witnessed the event.
I remember a lot of the stage work. There was quite a big fight where we had a flamethrower, and I remember the armourer actually fired live rounds with his shotgun at a dummy, I think. And so there were quite a lot of bullet hits, and there were also other bits and pieces which it wasn't really a sort of that intense special effects wise, but it was fun to work on, of course.
I remember one scene we were in Elstree Studios, and I had a Fisher Boom out, and we had doves. When the baddie came out, he turned into doves, and all the doves decided to land on my boom. And Tom Busman looked up and said, "I knew that thing would be good for something." Hey-ho. It's not the first time I've had pigeons sitting on a pole.
Right.
In 1986, I would be using a microphone which I've had since the 70s, and always trust it, never let me down, and well, that is it. It's a big bugger. Sorry, it's a big microphone. I use it both inside and out, where a lot of people frown on me using it inside. Unless I can't get it in because of the length, then I'll use something else.
The art department was quite small. I think it was David McHenry. I'm trying to think, was it Sue Potter was the set decorator, and we had a couple of draftsmen brought in just when we needed them. And when we went to Miami, there was just a couple of local crew that we had. It was very small. It was a very small little outfit. You know, we had an art department in Elstree, where we got all the drawings done and organised the props and whatever.
It was on the stage where we were at Boreham Wood, where we had a gun. The dummy was against the wall. I remember that, and I remember the armourer had fired one shotgun, and then they wanted to redo it with more hits on it. So I remember the special effects department, about 3 of us all with his guns firing at this dummy, which sort of really blew it to bits, of course, with that amount of firepower against it. I think it's the only time in my entire career that I've fired a live round at anything, because everything else has always been obviously a bullet hit that we've produced in the situation, either on a person or in a brick wall or a wooden door frame or something. Whereas in this case, shooting live rounds is very unusual. We were on location, and there was a gunfight, and we'd started at about 6:30 in the morning, laying all our cables and putting all the bullet hits in position, and there were explosions. There were mortar pots, mortar rounds supposed to be going off, and all the stuntmen would be running around, and there was a big crew there, a big not camera crew, but a lot of stunt people and also extras who all had blank firing automatic weapons, and they took a long time to load all the magazines and get them handed out, because everyone has to sign for one, because these are actual weapons that could be used. They actually are military weapons, although they've got restrictors in the barrel to fire the blank rounds and make them semi-automatic or fully automatic. Anyway, we were just about ready, and I remember the poor old armourer, he suddenly came across a live round in all these blanks, and he was at the end of reloading all these guns. And I remember the production manager suddenly went into a frenzy, because he's now calling all the guns back in, and he's got to empty all the magazines out, and I think there was only him and one other, and that must have taken an hour and a half to do. So we're now sort of well behind time, but anyway, eventually the cameras rolled, and we fired all our explosions and got the shot for them. But that was a bit of a dodgy start that particular day, and I felt very sorry for the armour, because it's just one of those things. What else could he do? One live round in there, in the middle of London somewhere we were. But anyway, it all ended well.
We did a bit of real interiors, but I mean I remember we had to do the interior of Madame Tussauds, and there's this devastation scene where all these crazy SAS type men led by Rick Mail go in chopping off heads of dummies and chainsawing this and smashing their way through that. So of course the set had to be kind of smashable. I mean, so you could actually wreck it and then replace it with the bits they wrecked. You had bits standing by to replace it so you could go again. It was the norm, really. Yeah. I think Ron Robson lit it as best I can remember, and Ron and I always used to sort of stand in the corner watching Tom going crazy and having a bit of a giggle and thinking, well, there he goes again. But no, as I say, Tom sort of suffered on that, and he found it hard.
The cast were lovely. Most casts in any film are. You've just got to get to know them, and I've got to get them to trust me that I will do what I can for them and what they can for me. Daniel Minzali, who I think went on to do L.A. Law. Loretta Swit, of course, was in MASH. Lovely lady. Most of the cast always were, perfect. You get some of the A-listers that, for example, you've got to get through their entourage to get at them, but once you've got there, not a problem. Lovely people.
I remember Rick Mell was in that production, Whoops Apocalypse. He was there and obviously using some of the props and things that we had made.
Peter Cook, yes. I had worked with Peter before, along with Dudley Moore. But in that, it was a very odd film. He played, I can't remember, mad scientist or prime minister. I can't remember what he did. But again, he was a little aloof, shall we say. I mean, yes, I got to know him eventually. I seem to remember Peter Cook walking around with a Union Jack umbrella for some reason because of radiation.
How about that? This provides complete protection against thermonuclear explosions up to 20 megatons. And it's very cheap, only costs £1. We've given the contract to a little firm in Milton Keynes, and they're churning them out by the truckload even as I speak. So, there you have it.
Done some, I think it was Beyond the Fringe, or Behind the Fridge, or something like that. The pair of them, Peter Cook and Dudley Moore. But that was a couple of days and maybe a week worth of filming.
We had the same thing that we did with Sting, where he pulled these switches on the film The Bride, and all these harnessing the lightning coming in, and all these big cauldrons and vats, they all suddenly start bubbling and there's bubbles and smoke. And we actually used Freon gas, which we pumped into the water as well, which caused bubbles, and when the bubbles burst, they sort of steamed and smoked. So I would imagine that since we'd done that, I think already we would have used the same technique on Whoops Apocalypse.
What do you think? Had it done by microsurgery. British medicine's the finest in the world.
Tom Busman, the director, he wanted Peter Cook to have the hook hand, like an old pirate hook, and so we made this hook for Peter and had fitted it so he could sort of hold his arm back up in his sleeve a bit, and we showed it to the director, and he immediately said, no, it's not quite the shape I want. So we had to make another one for Peter to wear. I do remember seeing it in rushes afterwards, and I remember thinking to myself, well, it doesn't look a lot different to the original one we made, so I don't quite know what was in the director's mind there, but there you go, that's their prerogative.
Tom was out on the outside, and it was always the conflict between them and him, and we tried to rally around him because he had nobody else. We were the only people he knew on set, so it was me and Ron Robson, who was the lighting cameraman, and all his usual crew, because he needed, he just needed backup.
157 warships I would call a slight overreaction to the problem, Marv. This kind of saber rattling we don't need right now.
Absolutely, madam.
What are the chances of getting Mascara back to the negotiating table?
Well, after what happened in Miami, I guess he's not feeling too talkative anymore.
Shane Rimmer, I worked with Shane, Whoops Apocalypse, but I know his voice from Thunderbirds. He was Scott Tracy. I always recognise him, his voice anyway.
There was one line that has stuck with me from that film, where the president's in chains because he's been caught out, and they arrested him and put him on a chain gang, and they see him walking past, and someone says to him, "Mr. President, how's life?" And he says, "Still doing it," which always, as I say, stuck with me because it sort of stuck me, and that was there was a few amusing bits in that film, yeah.
So, Mr. President, how's life?
Oh, still serving it.
I get presented with what I get presented with. I've got to know the script. I've got to know the lens sizes and lighting, obviously. But I know what, where, who, when are going to do whatever they're going to do. Sometimes they get away from me or they change it, but not often.
I think we did a few places in the Home Office. We recreated, and we recreated the outside of a South American dictator's balcony, and we had to do that. And there was this kind of one scene where he's actually addressing the crowds. Of course, there was no one there, and we were only sort of 6 foot off the ground. But that was it, really. Just all bits and pieces.
It's like any other job. You do it, you enjoy it, and the next film will be what it is. But looking back on Whoops Apocalypse, yeah, it was an odd film, but enjoyable.
During one of that fight scene I was referring to, where we had the flamethrower, which was an actual fact, one of our technicians was actually dressed up and on screen, in front of camera, firing the flamethrower, because obviously there was a certain amount of danger that, and he knew exactly what it could do and where he could fire it safely. But some of the extras got a bit carried away there as well, and there was a guy with an axe, and he actually axed straight through the gas feed to the flamethrower at the time, which and so suddenly Andy, in the middle of a shot, he's shouting out, cut the gas, because he's the only one that knows that the pipe is now just pumping propane gas out onto the stage. So that was a bit interesting for a few seconds.
I approached Tom recently and asked him what he thought and if he would do another movie, and he just didn't want to know. Absolutely didn't want to know. I think it left a scar on him. That's about it, really. We had it was a bit of preparation. We did it at Elstree Studios. We actually shot all the studio stuff at Elstree, and it was fine. I mean, we got it built, and it was all done on time, and it all worked well, and it looked okay. And a bit of location work, but I think, as best I remember, the main of it was in the studio.
My experience on Whoops Apocalypse was of what could have been a film that would have been better special effects wise if we'd had a larger budget, but that was how the film was obviously put together. With their costing was very tight on our side, which does cause problems sometimes, and it did us on that particular film. Sadly, I was away on locations again, and I didn't see the film when it was released, and so I've never seen a cutting of it or a copy of it. So I don't have memories that a lot of the films I worked on I have very fond memories of, and with the crew and everyone, but I don't have sort of fond memories of Whoops Apocalypse because of that price cutting problem.